Why do we run from silence? Not just from the absence of noise, but from the deep, sacred stillness that begins to surface when all external distractions fall away. We tend to treat silence like a blank screen, something to be filled, avoided, replaced. But what if silence isn't empty at all? What if it's alive and listening? For most of us, silence is unsettling. It doesn't flatter the ego. It doesn't entertain. It simply holds up a mirror. And in that mirror, we meet what we've spent so long avoiding, our fear of death, our unresolved grief, our longing for meaning. So we flee. We reach for sound, for content, for anything that will keep us from being still. But not all silence is absence. Some silence is presence, a presence that waits patiently, like an old friend we've forgotten how to sit beside. In this video, we explore two radically different visions of silence. Laozi, the Taoist sage who saw silence as harmony, and Blaise Pascal, the Christian philosopher who saw silence as confrontation. One opens the soul to unity, the other reveals its restless hunger. This is not a video about silence as a technique or as a mental health tool. It's not about optimizing your mornings or improving your focus. It is something slower, something older, an invitation to return to what silence really is beneath the definitions. Not a strategy, not a method, but a doorway. A passage into the space that has always been there, just beneath the noise. Silence doesn't flatter the mind. Sometimes it doesn't even soothe. What it does, gently, relentlessly, is reveal. It reveals the noise we carry inside, the frantic need to define ourselves, the places we feel alone, but never pause to acknowledge. But if we stay, something shifts. There's a moment, barely noticeable, when silence begins to feel less like a void and more like a presence. Laozi and Pascal both stepped into this space, but they did not return with the same message. In a moment, we'll walk with Laozi into the valley of stillness and listen for what the Tao might be whispering, not in words, but in rhythm. For Laozi, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something deeper. It is not emptiness, but the fertile origin from which all things arise, the Tao. The Tao is not a doctrine to be explained, nor a destination to be reached. It is the way beneath all ways, the river that flows whether we notice it or not, and silence in this view is the language of that river. According to the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. To speak of it is already to misname it. That's why Laozi doesn't urge us to define truth. He invites us to become still enough to hear it, like sitting at the edge of a forest before sunrise. No explanation, no sermon. Just the sound of leaves moving without wind, of light arriving without effort. In that silence, wisdom is not taught, it is absorbed. Not through intellect, but through being. Laozi shows us that silence is not a lack, but a fullness that asks for nothing. In Taoist thought, silence is not passive. It is the most receptive and therefore the most powerful form of being. It is not about withdrawing from life, but about ceasing to struggle against it. Laozi calls this Wu Wei, action without forcing, presence without imposition. It is not laziness, but participation in the deeper rhythm of all things. To live in Wu Wei is to become like water, soft, clear, flexible, yet stronger than stone. Water does not resist the rock. It flows around it, over time reshaping it, not by power but by patience. Likewise, silence does not fight the world. It moves with it without needing to win. In silence, we begin to listen with the whole body, not just with our ears, but with our breath, our skin, our awareness. We stop grasping, we stop naming, we begin to perceive without interference. This is not withdrawal, it is a return to the way things are before we try to control them, a return to presence, untouched and whole. In the teachings of Laozi, silence is not something we impose, it is something we return to. It was always there, beneath our words, beneath our roles, beneath our need to explain. Silence is not the opposite of life, but the atmosphere in which life breathes. It is clarity that does not demand answers, only presence. In silence, we see the impermanence of all things, but instead of resisting, we soften. We let go, not out of defeat, but out of deep trust. Trust that there is a wisdom deeper than thought, a rhythm that carries all things, including us. This silence does not fix, solve, or prove. It holds, and in that holding something begins to open, slowly, without fanfare. The heart loosens, the senses expand, and what was once hidden begins to reveal itself, not as a fact, but as a feeling. For Laozi, this is the path, not mastery, but surrender, not control, but participation. Silence is not something we practice, it is what we remember when we finally stop trying. For Blaise Pascal, silence is not comforting, it is disturbing. It is not the soft breath of nature or the calm presence of the Tao. It is the echo of a soul left alone, without distraction, without disguise. Pascal believed that our inability to be still, to simply sit in a quiet room, was the root of much of our suffering. Not because silence is harsh, but because it unmasks us. It confronts us with our smallness, our uncertainty, our craving to matter. When the noise stops, when we're no longer entertained, distracted, validated, what remains is the unfiltered self. And for Pascal, that self is often restless, anxious, aching. But this discomfort is not meaningless. It is a signal, a wound that points to something we lack. He called it the God-shaped vacuum, the hunger no achievement or pleasure can satisfy. In silence, that hunger becomes unbearable and undeniable. But in its very exposure, Pascal believed, begins the soul's healing. Not through self-mastery, but through surrender. Not by filling the void, but by acknowledging it. Pascal did not speak of silence in poetic metaphors. He saw it as spiritual surgery. It was not meant to soothe, but to cut, to expose, to purify. For him, the human soul is suspended between two truths, its greatness and its misery. Greatness because we are capable of thought, of wonder, of longing for the infinite. Misery because we constantly forget this, drowning ourselves in trivial pursuits, in endless distractions, in pleasures that promise meaning but deliver numbness. Silence breaks through that numbness. It brings the ache to the surface. And for Pascal, that ache is not a flaw to be fixed. It is the very evidence that we were made for more, made for God. In silence, stripped of stimulation, the soul stands naked before its own limits. And in that nakedness, something sacred can begin. Not the building of identity, but the undoing of illusion. Not pride, but humility. Not mastery, but longing. Silence, for Pascal, is not absence. It is invitation, an invitation to be undone, so that grace might enter. Pascal's silence is not gentle like a breeze. It is sharp like a blade, but not a blade that wounds to destroy. A blade that cuts so something hidden might be revealed. He saw in every human soul a tension, the desire to be whole, and the fear of what that wholeness might require. In the stillness, we no longer hide behind achievement or opinion. There is no audience to impress, no applause to chase. There is only the echo of our deepest need, the need to be loved, to be known, to be redeemed. And Pascal believed that in facing that echo without flinching, the soul is softened, not hardened by guilt, but broken open by grace. Silence in his vision is not a state we enjoy. It is a threshold we must cross, a place where the noise of the world fades and the voice of the eternal begins to speak, not always with comfort, but always with truth. To sit in silence for Pascal is to kneel in the unseen sanctuary of the heart and wait. Laozi and Pascal meet at the same threshold, silence, but they do not step through it in the same direction. For Laozi, silence is the rhythm beneath all things, the quiet flow that holds the universe together without force. It is soft, wide, ancient, a return to the source. For Pascal, silence is the space where human illusions dissolve. It is sharp, narrow, intimate, a descent into the self. One leads us outward into the current of nature. The other leads us inward into the ache of longing. Yet both see silence as a place of truth. Neither use it to escape life. They use it to encounter it. Laozi listens to the Tao. Pascal listens for God. Both hear something real, not in words but in presence. One finds peace in surrender, the other finds grace in need. Different tones, different textures, but the same invitation. Stop, be still, not to numb yourself, but to finally hear. Because beneath all our seeking, all our running, something has been waiting to speak. Both Laozi and Pascal remind us that silence is not neutral. It doesn't simply happen, it reveals. And what it reveals depends on how we enter it. Do we enter it to flee or to return? Do we seek comfort or truth? In Laozi's world, silence teaches us to trust the natural unfolding, to stop pushing and start listening. In Pascal's world, silence teaches us to face what we fear, not to be crushed by it, but to be opened by it. Neither path is easy. Silence may feel like peace one day and pressure the next. Sometimes it reflects our wholeness. Sometimes it shows us where we've cracked. But both experiences are sacred. Because silence does not lie, it reflects us back to ourselves and invites us to go deeper, not toward answers, but toward presence. And perhaps in that presence we'll find what we've always needed, not certainty, not escape, but the quiet courage to stay. In everyday life, silence is a stranger. Our world is shaped by motion, urgency, distraction. Even in moments of rest, we reach for something. Music, messages, noise to remind us that we're not alone. But this avoidance of silence is not neutral. It shapes how we breathe, how we relate, how we carry ourselves. Laozi and Pascal both invite us to reclaim silence, not as an aesthetic or a spiritual status, but as a way of remembering what matters. Perhaps it begins with one simple act, not filling the moment, turning off the background noise, closing the extra tabs, sitting without a task. Not for productivity, not for healing, but simply to meet ourselves again. Laozi would ask, can you trust the stillness even when it reveals nothing? Pascal would ask, can you remain seated when the ache starts to rise? Neither promises ease, but both suggest that something real waits on the other side, not a revelation, but a realignment, not fireworks, but a return. You don't need to call it meditation. You don't need incense, posture, or a perfect setting. What matters is the pause, the willingness to stop, to sit not with the goal of enlightenment, but with the quiet courage to stay present, maybe for 5 minutes, maybe just for one. And in that minute, don't strive to feel peace. Just notice. Notice the breath, notice the tension, notice the mind's refusal, and stay anyway. That moment of staying is the practice. Laozi would say, allow the water to settle, and the truth will appear. Pascal would say, endure the silence long enough, and grace may find you. Neither of them would ask you to succeed. They would ask you to remain, because something sacred happens, not when you master the silence, but when you stop trying to escape it. And in that surrender, you may find not answers, but a presence you didn't know you were missing. How do you relate to silence? Do you avoid it, or have you learned to sit with it? Does it feel like a burden, or like a doorway? We'd love to know what silence has revealed to you. Leave a comment below. Share your resistance, your rituals, your moments of stillness. And if this quiet journey spoke to something inside you, consider subscribing. Not for noise, not for quick answers, but for more spaces like this, where thought becomes breath and breath becomes presence. We don't promise conclusions, only the invitation to go deeper.